It was a magical day on Friday. You want to know why? Because out of the mouth of my son came a request for Sam Cooke, followed quickly by Buddy Holly. And I like that, right? Because of all the things that I've found most pleasing in life, there's only a few of them that beats music. Music is an incredible gift that we have been given from God. And so I want them to not only appreciate the utter garbage they do listen to, but also the profound depth from where what he's listening to comes. I want him to understand the fuller context. And if we get past, the 50s and the 60s, we might even get all the way back to people like Mozart and Bach and Beethoven, where he'll really begin to understand what music is all around, what music is all about. But it's a tricky business. How do I make him like Elvis, Sam Cooke? How do I make him? Well, you can't, right? You can't. It's like trying to, like my mother found out with me, you can't make someone like vegetables. I'm 59, I'm still there, Mom. You can't do it. But what you can do is what God does. You can play it in the house as they walk from room to room. You can offer it to them in the hope that it will eventually catch their ear. And if it catches their ear, then you're beginning to move them in a better appreciation for music. Then it's up to him, which is how God works. This is how the whole thing works, right? God doesn't do magic. When we pray to God and we ask for things like patience or faith, there's no divine zapping that goes on. There's no patience dust that he sprinkles over us. They're simply presented before us opportunities whereby we see it and we hear it. And God, of course, is hoping that as life progresses and these offers are made, then the better things and the good things of life will catch our ear. And we'll want to know about them deeper and broader and richer in context. That's how God works, right? If you've ever wondered how God hardened Pharaoh's heart, for example, there was no divine zapping. God hardened Pharaoh's heart by the ceaseless offer to do what is right. That's how God hardened Pharaoh's heart. He offered him the chance time and time again to do what is right and to let the people go. Every time he said no to God, then the next time becomes easier and easier and easier until our hearts, like our reading this morning from 1 Timothy, our hearts become seared. This is our reading. The Spirit unambiguously says that in later times, some will abandon the faith and follow deceiving spirits and things taught by demons. Such teachings come through lying hypocrites whose consciences have been seared as with a hot iron. They forbid people to marry and order them to abstain from certain foods which God created to be received with thanksgiving by those who believe and who know the truth. For everything God created is good, and nothing is to be rejected if it is received with thanksgiving. But before we even get there, why is Paul even writing in the first place? Why did Paul write anything to begin with, whether it's to Titus, whether it's the 2 times that he wrote to Timothy, whether it's the 3, possibly 4 letters that he sent to the Corinthians, 2 of which we have? Why did Paul write anything to anyone? If it's true what Jesus said, and I take it in here, everybody will agree that it's true what Jesus said, but if it's true what Jesus said is that the entire law and the prophets can be summed up in 2 commands: love God and love each other. If everything can be summed up in those 2 commands, why would we need anything else? If loving God and loving each other is the summation of all things, why is anyone writing anything? Well, because telling people to love God and telling them to love each other is pretty useless unless we know what love is. If we don't understand love, then those 2 commands become worthless to us. The problem isn't with what Jesus said. The problem is never what Jesus said. The problem is with the people that Jesus' words eventually reach. If we only have a vague understanding of love, then it stands to reason that at best we can only vaguely love God or vaguely love each other. If our understanding of love is weak, then our love is weak. And this is important because apparently all you need is love. Beatles said that. It's got to be true, right? And it is true. All we do need is love. Love is the single Christian doctrine out of which flows everything else. John, in quoting Jesus in his gospel, has Jesus saying this to them: "A new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, all men will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another." By this, love must be the defining characteristic of my people. Not the absence of a piano, not the adherence to doctrine. Love is how I want you to be recognized by people. In other words, as people walk around mineral wells, if they knew nothing else about us, they would have to be saying to each other, "Yeah, I don't really know what goes in there, but I know this, they love each other." Loving one another is the single non-negotiable of our faith. And as Jesus walked around with the 12, his language must have been saturated with this kind of teaching, because decades later, when John sits down to write a letter, all of this pours out. If anyone says, "I love God," yet hates his brother, he's a liar. For anyone who does not love God, does not love his brother, whom he has seen, cannot love God, whom he has not seen. Anyone who claims to be in the light, but hates his brother, is still in darkness. The man who says, "I know him," but does not do what he commands, is a liar, and the truth is not in him. This is how we know who the children of God are and who the children of the devil are. Anyone who does not do what is right is not a child of God, nor is anyone who does not love his brother. But all of that, any of that, is only of value if we understand what love is to begin with. And therein lies the disconnect. Because not everything that we call love is love. And we call some things that are not love, love. I was told in Glasgow one time with a couple I was talking to, he said, "Oh, we love each other. We're just not going to get married." It's the first time I ever heard that sentence. And I said, what, hold on. No, you love each other, so you're not going to get married. You're going to have to explain that to me, because I've married a bunch of people in my life, and every single one of them named that very thing as the reason to get married. And you're saying you love each other. That's what you call love? Non-commitment? You see, we assume, don't we? We wholeheartedly assume that we understand what love means. And yet there, at the crucial moment of our lives, we often get the cart before the horse. Dear friends, again it's the apostle. Dear friends, let us love one another, for love comes from God. Everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love. Now, quickly, I was deciding whether or not to keep this in, but I kept it in, because I want to illustrate why close attention needs to be paid, not only to what a text says, but what a text means. Because the Apostle John says something here that is in desperate need of clarification. Because John is saying, everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. That's what John writes. Everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. Well, even Hitler had dogs. I assume he loved his Eva Braun. He married her. In fact, he married her 5 minutes before they ended themselves. He had every out in the world. He could have said, well, I love you, sweetheart, but what's the point? And he still married her. Yet John says, everyone who loves has been born of God. Well, you and I both know that if we went back to the great apostle with that kind of example, John would have went on from what he said to what he meant. So evidently what Scripture means is far more important than what Scripture says. A parrot can recite Scripture. But so important is what John says. He repeats himself a few verses later. He says, if anyone acknowledges that Jesus is the Son of God, God lives in him and he in God, and so we know and rely on the love God has for us. God is love. Whoever lives in love lives in God and God in him. And before I move on again, I've got to grab John again to quickly illustrate to you the same point. John says, if anyone acknowledges that Jesus is the Son of God, God lives in him and he in God. Is that true? Might I remind you of Luke chapter 8? When Jesus stepped ashore, he was met by a demon-possessed man. When the demon-possessed man saw Jesus, he cried out, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God. John says if anyone acknowledges that Jesus is the Son of God, God lives in him. But of course, if after reading that you took it to John, and you said, if anyone acknowledges, and yet remember that demon-possessed man, that's the very thing he did. He acknowledged that Jesus was the Son. What would John have done? John would have taken you to what he said, to what he meant. But if nothing else, this illustrates very clearly that we can't go grabbing at individual texts in the Bible and start treating them as though they are the only text ever written. But John says something twice here, and I'm not convinced we've fully understood what is being meant by what is being said. In verse 8 and verse 16 of 1 John 4, John utters three simple words. God is love. Now, I've already explained that that's pretty useless unless we know what love means, but that's not even what John is emphasizing. John, like every biblical author, is seeking to reveal and emphasize God. John is not saying, well, he is, but he's not. Let me explain. He's not saying God is love, as though everybody already knows what love is. He's not saying God is love. He's saying God is love. He is the definition of the word. In other words, we don't get to decide what love is and then hold God accountable to our understanding of it. That's not how it works. John is saying God is love, and so therefore to understand love, one must first come to know and to understand God. We did not make the move. God made the move. We only love because He first loved us. We wouldn't even know what the thing is unless He had made the move. Love is not God. God is God, and God is love. Love is not some mystical force that exists outside of God, separate from God, which for some unexplainable reason even God has to submit to. If that was true, that love exists apart from God and God must obey love, then love is God. It sits above God, but love is not God. God is God. And by definition, He chooses to love. That is, He gets to define it. He is the definition of it. He only and always acts in a loving manner. Therefore, if we want to understand what love is, then we look at Him. He's the definition of it. It's a very cunning shift in tactics. Because everybody now knows that it would be nothing short of idolatry to create God in our own image, we simply shifted the goalposts and created love in our own image and then held Him accountable to that. And the reason we need God to define what love is because His understanding of it varies, sometimes greatly varies, from our understanding of it. And it's not God who needs to be brought to heel on what we think constitutes love. It's that we need to be brought to heel to understand love. Psalm 136 will serve as a fine example here of what I mean. Give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. His love endures forever. Give thanks to the God of gods. His love endures forever. This line, his love endures forever, repeats. More than likely, the rabbi or who was ever leading the service would say the first line, and the congregation would repeat his love endures forever. God who made, his love endures forever. God who did this, his love endures forever. Give thanks to the Lord of Lords, his love endures forever. To him alone who does great wonders, his love endures forever. Who by his understanding made the heavens, his love endures forever. Who spread out the earth upon the waters, his love endures forever. Who made the great lights, his love endures forever. The sun to govern the day, his love endures forever. The moon and stars to govern the night, his love endures forever. Firstly, because this will be my closing thought, I wanted you to notice how the psalmist cements the love of God in the creation. It's the creation the psalmist goes to reveal and display the love of God, okay? But Psalm 136 doesn't cause anyone any problems. Give thanks to God because his love endures forever. Yep, no problem. Give thanks for his great wonders. Yep, no problem there. Give thanks for his understanding. Yep, no problem. That's clear evidence of his love. For making the heavens. Yep, no problem. Clearly love in action. For the great lights, the sun, the moon, the spreading of the earth. Yep, no problem. His love endures forever. No one has any problem with any of this being discussed as evidence of God's love until we get to verse 10. To him who struck down the firstborn of Egypt, creating thousands of deaths in one night, thousands of firstborn children dead, and the congregation said, his love endures forever. To him who swept Pharaoh and his army into the Red Sea, instantly creating thousands upon thousands of widows and orphans. And the congregation replied, his love endures forever. To him who struck down great kings, his love endures forever. And who killed mighty kings, his love endures forever. No, run in the modern apologists. That's not love. That's God's anger. It might be his wrath. It's probably his justice. Not according to the psalmist. And he's pretty emphatic about it. In fact, before the psalm finishes, his love endures forever repeats 36 times. Psalm 136 and other passages we could turn to set us back on our heels. And then we have the thought, oh, that's love. That was a loving act. You see, it doesn't get easier for us the farther away from Hollywood we drag the definition of love. And when we begin to allow God to define it. The letter that Jesus wrote to the church in Laodicea, he said, those whom I love, I rebuke and discipline. That's love. You see, you'll forgive me for noticing that it appears terribly convenient and self-serving and self-promoting, ensuring everyone will know just how wonderful I am if I restrict love to hugs and flowers. But love is not weak. Love is strong. Love does not respond to what is wanted, but to what is needed. Love confronts. Love convicts. Love disciplines. Love corrects. Love risks the accusation of being loveless in its pursuit to love. Did I ever tell you about the time, maybe I said it on a Wednesday night, I don't think so. Did I ever tell you about the time that my mother, my own mother, inflicted a horrendous degree of pain upon, I mean screaming the house down, banshee level type screaming. We were outside, I was probably about his age, we were outside playing chases, and I was running between two sheds that I can still see as plainly as I'm seeing you. And I ran between these two sheds, but on the ground there was a plank of wood, and protruding right through the wood was a nail, a rusty nail that apparently didn't care that I had tennis shoes on, and a nail that received evidently no instruction from my sock to move away, and went right into my foot, deep into my foot. And like the idiot that I was, I thought it would be a good idea to go home and show my mom and explain to her what happened. So you tell me, who on earth could ever find it in their heart to force a child, her own child, onto the ground and hold his leg and foot in a vice-like grip and further gouge the very wound I brought her to heal? Who on earth could do that to a child? A mother. That's who. A mother. And if I came to you afterwards in my immaturity and said to you, it's evident she doesn't love me, did you see what she did? You would say, you're a moron. The very thing you're using to prove she doesn't love you is proving that she does love you. For if she didn't love you, she wouldn't have cared. Love is strong. Love does not sit idly by and allow the poison to kill the child. Isn't that Paul's instruction to the Corinthians when they spoke about the man who was caught up in sexual immorality? What's Paul's advice to them? Get that poison out. And not because Paul didn't love the guy, not because God didn't love the guy, but Paul understands poison. And if left unchecked, what it can do to the entire foot, or the leg, or indeed the child itself. Love does not sit idly by and watch the poison kill the child. If you can grasp that concept, you have understood the curse, our fall from grace, and our Father, when he came to us and said the following, I will greatly increase your pains in childbearing. With pain you will give birth to your children. Your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you. And to Adam he said, because you listened to your wife and ate from the tree of which I commanded you, do not eat, cursed is the ground because of you. Through painful toil you will eat of it all the days of your life. It will produce thorns and thistles for you, and you will eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your brow you will eat your food. The pain, the sorrow, the heartache, and the suffering that God brought into the garden in our response to in our response to Him, in our rebellion, His response to us was the curse. And everything you read in there is God beginning to gouge out the poison from the foot of the human family. He's not throwing a hissy fit in Genesis chapter 3. He's setting about the salvation of the world. Of course, it's a spanking, but it's a redemptive spanking. Its intention is to sober the human family back to the loving arms of their Father. It's why I began with the verses that I did. The Spirit clearly says that in time some will abandon the faith and follow deceiving spirits and things taught by demons. Such teachings come through lying hypocrites whose consciences have been seared as with a hot iron. They forbid people to marry and order them to abstain from certain foods which God created. He doesn't use the word lightly. Neither does he use it as a filler. God created to be received with thanksgiving. For everything God created is good, and nothing is to be rejected. Everything, you understand, everything goes back to the garden, to the creation, to the Creator's intent. Even thousands of years later, when Paul's dealing with heresies that are beginning to arise within the church, Paul says, to the garden. You want to understand what's going on? To the garden we go. A failure to understand the creation is a failure everywhere. I cannot emphasize enough, to those of you who are serious Bible scholars in here, I cannot overemphasize the need to understand Genesis, the first few chapters, and to really get a hold of what's going on there. In Matthew 19, they came to Jesus, remember? Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any and every reason? Haven't you read, Jesus said, at the beginning, God created them male and female. Why then did Moses come along and say that we can divorce them? Moses did that because your hearts were hardened. It wasn't so from the beginning. Jesus says, drags them in the middle of a divorce and remarry argument. He drags them back to the garden, to the Creator's intent. It isn't by coincidence that the book opens with the tree of life and finishes with the tree of life. Our entire story is embraced with the garden narrative. Paul's entire argument against sexual immorality in Romans 1 is creational. They exchanged the truth of God and worshipped and served created things rather than, he could have said God, he didn't say God, he said the Creator. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature having clearly been. God isn't against homosexuality or any other sexual immorality for that reason. He's not against it because he finds it icky. He's not some prude at the back of a church building who's, I can't even think about what they... That's not God. God's against it because it's anti-creational. It runs against the grain of his created intent. So you can't come and say, well, I don't know how you can condemn this because it mentions nothing of that in the Bible. It doesn't have to mention it in the Bible. It tells you what he was intending to do, and anything that runs against that grain is wrong. It's anti-creational. You've got a problem with that? I'm sure he'll be all ears. when you get and discuss it with them. Even gender roles within the church, thousands of years after it happened. What are men meant to do? What are women meant to do? Paul, where does Paul take us? To the garden. Modern Christianity's greatest mistake was, for a few hundred years there, we were very anti-Semitic. And because that was true, we ran around like a bunch of spoiled brats with the New Testament, waving it as though it's all we need, and bragging because it was the New Testament and not the Old. You can imagine the attitude. Well, in that process, we lost a lot of great teaching about the Hebrew Scriptures. And anyone who's a Bible scholar in here understands you don't have a snowball's chance in hell of understanding the New Testament without the Hebrew Scriptures. You can't understand Jesus and what he's even referring to without the Hebrew Scriptures. Now, it's perfectly true that once Jesus came, then the Hebrew Scriptures had to be examined under an even greater light, and they became even better. But the beginning of that process are the books that Jesus was raised on, and where he learned. The feet that he sat by were the Hebrew Scriptures. His songbook was the Psalms growing up. And in amongst all that, of course, we lost a huge portion of what we all used to know about Genesis and just how important it was. And we need to get back there, especially with your children. There's no greater story than when you sit down with your children and open it at the first page. And on that very first page, you can say, look, this was your father's intent. And you read through the text where the child witnesses a father coming to his children to show them what is good, what is good, what is good, what is good. You want to mess with that? I've read the rest of the book. I wouldn't advise it.